2019. A man in Ohio spent $30,000 on a basement shelter. Water filtration, solar panels, food for a year. He was proud. He told his neighbors. He posted on Facebook. When the first bad storm hit, not a collapse, not a war, a storm, 11 people showed up at his door. He couldn't turn them away. His one-year supply lasted 38 days. That story is not unusual. That story is the default outcome when preparation meets zero operational security. And today, we are going to take it apart like a system failure, because that is exactly what it is. I spent over a decade building IT infrastructure, servers, networks, disaster recovery systems. And one of the first things you learn in that world is this: a system is only as secure as its least protected exposure point. It does not matter how strong your encryption is if you're broadcasting your credentials on a public forum. It does not matter how well you've redundancy engineered your architecture if you've published the blueprint on your personal website. The technical work and the operational security work are separate disciplines, and you need both. One without the other is just expensive vulnerability. Preppers build the architecture, then they publish the blueprint, repeatedly, enthusiastically, on social media, in conversations at community meetings, in the recycling bin that sits at the end of the driveway every Tuesday. They build serious systems and then treat information about those systems like it has no value. It does have value. It has exactly the value of everything in those systems to anyone who might want it when conditions are bad enough. This video is about attack surfaces. It is about information hygiene. It is about the 5 specific mistakes that turn a year's worth of preparation into a 38-day liability. And it is about how to fix each one without becoming a hermit, without abandoning your community, and without the paranoia that makes this space so exhausting for newcomers. Let me start with a concept. Every IT security professional knows it. Most preppers have never heard it applied to their situation. Your attack surface is the total sum of all the different points where an adversary can try to enter your system, extract information from it, or cause it damage. In a corporate network, that's open ports, unpatched software, employee credentials, physical access points, third-party integrations with weak security postures. The job of security architecture is not to make the attack surface zero. You can't do that and still run a functional system. The job is to reduce that surface to the minimum that operation requires, to know exactly what that surface is at all times, and to monitor the exposure points you cannot eliminate. You have a personal preparedness attack surface. It is the sum of all information about your readiness that exists outside your direct control. What your neighbors know, what your extended family knows, what you've posted publicly, what's physically visible from the street or your driveway, what you've said in community meetings or online forums, what products you've ordered that are visible in your recycling bin, what your internet search history reveals to your ISP and to platforms that serve you targeted advertising, what your purchase history at hardware stores and outdoor suppliers looks like to data brokers. Most people who have been preparing for 2, 3, 5 years have an attack surface the size of a barn door, and they have no idea because they never audited it. Nobody taught them that the audit was necessary. The prepping community spends enormous amounts of energy on gear lists, food rotation schedules, water purification methods. Almost nobody talks about information security. That is a gap. Today we close it. Here is how to think about this correctly. In IT security, there is a principle called need-to-know access. It is not about secrecy for its own sake. It is about compartmentalization. You provide access to sensitive information only to those who need it to perform their function. And you grant the minimum access necessary for that function. Your CEO does not need the database root password. Your DBA does not need the executive compensation structure. Your customer support team does not need the source code repository. Information flows on a need-to-know basis, compartmentalized deliberately, because the more people hold sensitive information, the higher the mathematical probability of a breach, through accident, through social engineering, through a moment of poor judgment under stress. Apply that principle to your preparedness situation. Who genuinely needs to know that you have a 6-month food supply? Your immediate household. Perhaps 1 or 2 carefully selected people in your inner network, people whose loyalty you have verified over time, whose discretion you trust because you've seen them be discreet, whose own preparedness creates a mutual interest in keeping each other's situation private. That is the list. It should be short. It should be the result of deliberate thought, not default sharing. Everyone else operates on modified information. Not lies, not deception, just non-disclosure. There is an important difference between actively lying about your situation and simply choosing not to broadcast it. The Ohio man was not asked by all 11 neighbors what his basement contained. He volunteered that information, repeatedly, proudly. That was a choice, and the choice had consequences that were entirely predictable from an information security perspective. Now let's go through the 5 mistakes. These are not theoretical constructs. These are the 5 patterns I've identified most consistently in this community, including, I'll be honest, in my own early approach before I started thinking about this with the same discipline I'd apply to a production system. Mistake 1. Talking about quantities. This is the single most common failure mode and the easiest one to fix. People discuss their preparedness in specifics, not just "_0, $_1. That's fine, that's the right level. Specifics, __, "_1, ___, "_2, "_3, Every one of those statements is a data entry in the mental database that your listeners are building, whether they intend to or not. Human memory is associative and stress-activated. The neighbor who heard you casually mention 3 months of food at a neighborhood barbecue 2 summers ago will not consciously remember that conversation during normal times. When their family is hungry, when the shelves at the grocery store are empty, when conditions are bad enough that memory activates. Not maliciously, automatically. The brain is looking for solutions, and it finds the entry it made. ___, __4__. That's not villainy. That's biology. But the outcome for you is the same. The fix is not to lie about your situation. The fix is to change the unit of measurement and reduce the specificity of everything you say. Quote 5, quote 6, quote 7. Every one of these statements is accurate. None of them contain data. None of them create a database entry about quantities, locations, or types of supplies. If someone asks you direct questions, and some people will, especially after a local emergency gets people thinking about these things, you answer in relative terms. Quote 8, quote 9, quote 10. Informative enough to satisfy curiosity, non-specific enough to be useless as operational intelligence. This feels unnatural at first. We are social animals. We are wired to share progress, to build social status through demonstrated competence, to bond through disclosure. Switching to information discipline requires a conscious override of those instincts. The way I think about it, a doctor doesn't discuss a patient's records over dinner, even though sharing the interesting details would make a good story and build social connection. The discipline is not about distrust, it's about professional behavior applied to sensitive information. Your supply inventory is sensitive information. Treat it accordingly. Mistake 2. Social media visibility. This one needs no subtlety. Social media is a permanent, searchable, indexed record of everything you have voluntarily published. Everything. The Facebook post with your new water filtration setup and the smiling photo of you next to it. The Instagram picture that shows the corner of your storage shelving in the background. The Reddit thread where you described your specific situation in detail in order to get advice on what to buy next, complete with your location, your household size, and your current inventory gaps. The Amazon review you left for a freeze-dried food brand that mentions in the text how many months of supply you're building toward. Every one of those is a permanent, searchable, linkable data point about your preparedness status, associated with your real identity via your account credentials. The Ohio man's Facebook post was just the most obvious version of a behavior that is widespread. A meaningful portion of the active preparedness community has publicly documented, with photographs and specific details, a reasonably accurate picture of what they have and where they are. Here is what makes this different from private conversation: permanence and searchability. What you tell your neighbor in person can fade, can be misremembered, exists only in one person's memory. What you post online is indexed by search engines, cached by the Wayback Machine, potentially scraped by data aggregation services, and accessible to anyone with basic search skills indefinitely. The audience for your disclosure is not the people who see it the day you post it. The audience is everyone who could ever search for it under any future conditions. Audit this. Today. Go through your accounts, every platform, with one specific question. Does this post contain information about what I have, where it is, how much of it I have, or what my specific preparedness setup looks like? If yes, evaluate whether it should continue to exist publicly. Delete what doesn't need to be there. Change what can be changed. Make what needs to remain as vague as possible without removing the value it has for you. The harder discipline is going forward. Before you post anything related to your preparedness, run one question. Does publishing this information benefit me more than it costs me in increased exposure? In most cases, the benefit is social. You want community, validation, a sense of shared project with people who understand. The cost is informational. You are permanently expanding your attack surface. For most posts, in most cases, the trade is not favorable. The social benefit is modest and temporary. The information cost is permanent. There is a narrow category of exception: generic educational content, explaining how water filtration works, why rotation schedules matter, how to evaluate food storage methods, carries relatively low operational risk because it does not disclose your specific situation. The line is between "here's how these systems work" and "here's what my system looks like." The first is teaching, the second is a target. Mistake 3. Physical exposure. Stand at the end of your driveway. Now stand on the public sidewalk in front of your house. What can you see? What can a delivery driver observe when you open the front door? What does a passing neighbor notice when you carry things in from the car? What is visible through a ground floor window? What is sitting in your recycling bin on pickup day? I know this sounds like the beginning of paranoia. It is not. This is a basic physical security assessment, the exact kind that a facilities security manager does when evaluating a commercial building. The assessment is not predicated on the assumption that specific bad actors are watching you right now. The assessment is about what information is passively, constantly available to any casual observer. You are not securing against a targeted threat. You are reducing ambient information leakage. Cardboard boxes from freeze-dried food suppliers are large, distinctively branded, and recognizable to anyone in this space. People who know the category will know immediately what those boxes contain. The same is true for boxes from water storage container suppliers, solar equipment vendors, medical supply companies, and ammunition distributors. Your recycling bin, on a weekly basis, is a reasonably accurate readout of your purchasing activity. It sits at the end of your driveway, in public view, on a predictable schedule. The fix is not difficult. Break down boxes inside the house before bringing them to the recycling. Mix preparedness packaging with other household waste so no single category is obvious. Use opaque bags when available. If you are receiving large volumes of supplies in a short period, consider receiving some deliveries to an alternative address, a P.O. box, a trusted family member's address, a workplace that allows packages. This is not extreme. This is the physical equivalent of locking your workstation when you step away from your desk. Basic hygiene that every IT professional treats as automatic. The inside-the-house version of this is also worth addressing. If your preparedness storage is visible from a window, from the street, from a neighbor's property, from a shared backyard, that visibility creates ambient exposure. Window treatments. Basement versus ground floor storage. Locked doors on storage areas. These are modest adjustments that meaningfully reduce what a casual observer can learn by looking at your property. Mistake 4. Trust placed in the wrong circles. Preparedness communities are, by their nature, trust-based. People bond over shared values, self-reliance, resilience, skepticism toward fragile systems, belief in taking personal responsibility for one's own security. That bonding creates real, meaningful social capital. It is also exactly what creates this specific vulnerability. The vulnerability is the assumption that shared values equals shared discretion. It does not. Someone can be a completely committed, serious preparer and still have a spouse who mentions things casually in conversation, a teenager who talks to their friends, an elderly parent who brings it up at church, an extended family network through which information flows freely and without any concept of operational significance. Someone can be completely trustworthy in normal circumstances and behave entirely differently when their children have not eaten in 2 days. Not because they are bad people, because they are people. This is not cynicism. This is stress testing the architecture of your social network. The same way you would stress test a server by simulating load conditions higher than normal operation. The question is not, quote 1.3, quote. The question is, quote 1.4, quote, you do not know. Neither do they, probably. That uncertainty should be factored into how much information you share. In IT terms, your system is only as secure as the account held by the least disciplined user with access to sensitive data. One person in your trusted circle with poor information hygiene, however genuine their intentions and loyalty, expands your effective attack surface to everyone in their social network. That is not a small number. The practical principle is tiered access. Your innermost circle, household, highest trust relationships gets complete information. An intermediate circle, people you've known a long time, whose judgment under stress you've had some opportunity to observe, gets partial information. Enough to enable coordination without creating a complete inventory picture. Everyone else gets no operational information. Friendly, engaged, real relationships, just no operational intelligence. This is not unfriendly. This is not the behavior of someone who mistrusts their community. This is the behavior of someone who has thought carefully about information architecture. The closest analogy in everyday professional life. You have colleagues you work closely with and trust entirely in professional terms, but you don't tell all of them every detail of every project. That's not distrust, that's appropriate compartmentalization for a complex system. Mistake 5. Purchasing patterns and data trails. This one is the most overlooked because it requires thinking about systems that are mostly invisible to the people using them. Your purchasing behavior creates persistent records in more places than most people have mapped. Your email inbox contains order confirmations from every supplier you've used, with complete itemized lists of what you bought, quantities, prices, and delivery addresses. Your major platform purchase history, Amazon, Walmart, Target, specialty outdoor retailers with online stores, is a time-stamped inventory of your acquisition activity going back years. Your credit and debit card statements contain transaction records at every brick-and-mortar store you visited. Your loyalty cards at hardware stores, outdoor gear retailers, and grocery chains are databases of your consumption patterns, maintained by the retailer and often sold to data brokers. None of this is sinister on its own. This is just how modern retail infrastructure works. The relevant question for operational security is not whether the data exists, it does, but what it reveals if someone accesses it, and through what vectors that access could occur. The realistic threat vectors are not exotic. An account breach, your email, your Amazon account, your loyalty program account, exposes the underlying purchase data to whoever achieves that access. A domestic situation involving someone in your household who has access to shared financial accounts creates exposure. A legal process, in sufficiently extreme circumstances, can compel access to financial records. A data broker breach, and these occur regularly, can expose aggregated consumer profiles that include purchase category patterns. The mitigation is segmented purchasing. Not the elimination of digital purchasing. That's impractical for most people at meaningful scale. Rather, a deliberate division of purchasing across channels that prevents any single source from having a complete picture. Some purchases by cash, in person, at stores without loyalty programs, particularly for the highest information value items. Different payment methods for different categories. Separate email addresses for different supplier relationships. Delivery to varied addresses for high-volume periods. This is not a complete solution. It is a reduction in completeness of the data picture available at any single point of access. The goal is not invisibility. You cannot be fully invisible in the modern purchasing environment without severely limiting what you can acquire. The goal is reducing the value of any single compromised account or data breach by ensuring no single source can reconstruct your complete preparedness status. Before we get to the harder question about community, let me give you something concrete. Because I just described 5 categories of mistakes and 5 categories of fixes, and I know how this goes. You read the list, you nod, you close the video, nothing changes. 2 months later, you post a photo of your new generator on Instagram because it's genuinely exciting and you want to share it with people who will appreciate it. I've done that. Most people in this space have. So let me give you a mental model that is more durable than a list of rules. A model you can apply in real time without consulting a checklist whenever you're about to say something or post something or show something to someone. Think of your preparedness information as a product with a market value, not a dollar value, an adversarial value. The adversarial value of information is what it's worth to someone who wants to exploit it. Your neighbor's mild curiosity about whether you have some extra food. Low adversarial value. A stranger who specifically knows you have 12 months of supplies, a generator, and a water filtration system in a neighborhood where a week-long power outage just started. High adversarial value. The same information has very different adversarial value depending on conditions. The mistake most people make is that they evaluate the risk of sharing information based on current conditions. Everything is fine right now, the neighborhood is friendly, nobody is going to break into my basement for a can of beans. That evaluation is correct for current conditions. The problem is that information you share today exists in all future conditions. You cannot unshare it. You cannot adjust the adversarial value of information you've already disclosed when conditions change. You can only control what you share before the conditions change. This is identical to a problem in software security called privilege creep. An employee gets access to a system for a specific legitimate reason. Time passes, their role changes, but their access level is never reviewed and never reduced. Over time, the gap between what they need and what they have grows. When a breach happens, whether from that employee acting badly or from their credentials being stolen, the damage is proportional to the excess privilege they accumulated, not to the privilege they actually needed. Your social network accumulates privilege over time. Each conversation, each post, each visible delivery builds a more complete picture in the minds of more people. Under normal conditions, that accumulated picture has no adversarial value. Under stress conditions, it does. The damage when those conditions arrive is proportional to the privilege that accumulated over time, the total sum of what you shared, not to what you would have shared if you had known how bad things would get. The mental model, in one question, would I be comfortable if this information existed in the minds of these people during the worst version of a realistic emergency in my area? Not a collapse, not a war. A realistic emergency, a week without power, a month of supply chain disruption, a local economic shock that leaves a quarter of your neighbors unable to afford food. If the answer is no, if you would not want those specific people to know this specific information under those conditions, then sharing it today is a deferred mistake. You're just moving the cost into the future. Apply that question before every conversation, every post, every delivery you're not bothering to break down the box for. It doesn't take long. It becomes a reflex. And the reflex is the goal, not a checklist you have to remember, but an automatic evaluation that runs in the background whenever operational information is about to leave your direct control. There is a second mental model that pairs with this one, and it comes directly from network security architecture. In network security, the principle of defense in depth means you don't rely on any single control to protect a system. You layer controls so that the failure of any one layer does not create a catastrophic breach. If the firewall fails, there's the intrusion detection system. If that fails, there's access logging. If that fails, there's compartmentalized data. No single point where one failure equals total compromise. Apply that to OPSEC. No single control is perfect. Your information discipline will occasionally slip. You'll say something specific at a moment of social enthusiasm. A post from years ago will turn out to still exist somewhere. A neighbor will happen to observe something you didn't intend them to see. That's inevitable. The goal is not a perfect single layer of protection. The goal is enough layers that any single failure doesn't produce a catastrophic outcome. This means, even if your neighbor knows you have significant supplies, they probably don't know the exact amount. Even if they know the approximate amount, they probably don't know the specific location. Even if they know the location, a physical security layer, locked doors, non-obvious access points, a storage arrangement that doesn't reveal everything at once, provides a further barrier. Even if they get past the physical layer, the question is whether you have a social architecture, a trusted network of households with mutual obligations that provides enough collective capacity to manage the situation. Defense in depth means you're not relying on one secret. You're building a system where the failure of any single layer creates a limited problem, not a complete exposure. The Ohio man had no layers. He had one layer, his own knowledge of what he had, and he dissolved that layer himself voluntarily over time. When the situation arrived, there was nothing between him and 11 people at his door. Now I want to address the harder question, because it is the question that makes people push back on OPSEC in this context, and the pushback is not unreasonable. Isn't preparedness supposed to be about community? Isn't resilience inherently collective? If everyone in a neighborhood practiced this level of information discipline, wouldn't the result be a community that cannot coordinate, where nobody knows what resources exist, where nobody knows who to call, where the mutual aid that makes communities actually resilient in disaster is impossible because everyone is keeping secrets? This tension is genuine. It is not dissolved by pretending it doesn't exist, and I am not going to pretend it doesn't exist. Here is how I think about it as an engineering problem. The goal of community preparedness is coordination capacity, the ability to pool resources and skills at the moment they're needed. That coordination does not require a passive public inventory of who has what. It requires active trust networks with explicit mutual commitments made in advance, under normal conditions, before any stress is applied. The distinction is between passive broadcasting and active covenant. Passive broadcasting means you publish or share information about your supplies broadly in the hope that the right people who will contribute rather than only consume, people who will maintain discretion, people who you would actually want to coordinate with, happen to receive that information and self-select into your network. The Ohio man used passive broadcasting. He got 11 people at his door, none of them screened, none of them committed in advance to contributing anything in return. A covenant is different. A covenant means you identify, in advance, a small number of households, 4, 5, maybe 8, with whom you explicitly discuss mutual support. You disclose relevant information within that group. You agree in advance what the terms of that support look like, who does what, how resources are pooled, what the decision-making structure is under stress. You maintain complete information discipline with everyone outside that group. The Ohio man needed a covenant of 5 households. 5 households who had also prepared at meaningful levels, who had agreed in advance to mutual support, whose presence in an emergency would add resources and skills to the collective rather than only drawing them down. Instead, he had a Facebook post. The Facebook post produced 11 strangers at his door. A covenant of 5 prepared households would have produced 5 reliable contributors with coordinated roles, committed in advance, arriving with their own resources to add to the collective pool. Community and OPSEC are not incompatible. They require that community be built intentionally, through direct relationship and explicit agreement, rather than through broadcast and hope. Here is the audit. This is the concrete exercise I want you to run this week. It takes about 45 minutes, and you should do it before you do anything else I've described in this video, because without the audit, you do not know what you are working with. Take a piece of paper. Draw 4 columns. Label them: people, online, physical, purchasing. Under people, write down everyone outside your immediate household who knows anything meaningful about your preparedness status. What specifically do they know? Under online, write every platform, every account, every post or comment you can remember that contains operational information about your situation. Under physical, write what is visible from outside your property, what your recycling reveals, what a visitor to your home would be able to observe. Under purchasing, identify which accounts and channels hold information about your acquisition activity and what they could reveal if compromised. What you are looking at when you finish is your attack surface. It is probably larger than you expected. That is fine. This is the assessment phase. The point of the audit is not to cause distress. The point is to create a map you can act on. Work through each item. Under people, can you reduce specificity in future conversations? Under online, what can be deleted? What can be made more vague? What needs to stay because it has community value that outweighs the exposure? Under physical, what are the straightforward changes to visibility and packaging hygiene? Under purchasing, what is the realistic segmentation you can implement going forward? You will not fix everything in 1 week. You do not need to. You need to close the largest exposures, establish the habits that prevent new exposure from accumulating, and identify the covenant, the small group of households with whom you build the kind of explicit, mutual, committed preparedness network that actually provides collective resilience. One more thing before we close. The Ohio man is not a villain in this story. He built something real. He was generous when people showed up at his door. He made a choice to help, and that choice cost him almost everything he had prepared. Those are understandable, recognizably human behaviors. I'm not here to criticize him, but he also made, in advance, a long series of small information security decisions, each of them individually minor, collectively catastrophic, that made that outcome nearly inevitable. He had no attack surface awareness. He had no need-to-know discipline. He broadcast his situation to an unscreened audience without evaluating what that broadcasting would produce under stress conditions. When those stress conditions arrived, the broadcast produced exactly what an IT security professional would have predicted. The lesson is not to stop being proud of what you build. The lesson is to understand that the work you do has value, real, material, practical value, and that valuable systems require protection. You would not build a server with sensitive data and leave the firewall disabled because you were proud of the architecture. The same principle applies here. Audit your exposure. What do your neighbors know? What have you posted? What's visible from the street? Write it down. That's your attack surface. An engineer secures the system before deploying it. Next video, the financial layer. Your food supply, your water, your communications, all of it depends on a financial foundation that most people have built on single points of failure they have not identified and have not addressed. We will take it apart the same way we took this apart. Same framework, different domain, same conclusion. The vulnerability you have not mapped is the one that will cost you.